Recording. So Nora and Mariana in English. I see you guys are doing it. Perfect. Record to the cloud. There we go. Okay, we are all set. So welcome everyone to the Boost CYAC webinar. Just a couple really quick housekeeping points. This presenter, Mireille, is going to be speaking in French. So for those who want to follow along in English, along the bottom bar of Zoom, you'll see a little globe that says interpretation. You're going to click on the language you want to listen to. So if you want to follow the meeting in English, you click English. If you want to follow it in French, you can just leave it as original audio. That's really all that we need from me. I will pass it to Mireille. Thanks very much.
Merci beaucoup. Je tiens d'abord à remercier.
Hello. First of all, I would really like to thank you and thank the center, the Boost Child Support Center. Today, I'm going to talk about how to conduct efficient forensic interviews adapted to children's developmental capacities, strategies, and attitudes. I'm really happy to speak to you today. So I'm going to speak to you about a few different things: the interviewer preparation, and when children are not ready to disclose, this is something that we have to deal with. So about certain forms of resistance. Also, how to prepare the child or adolescent to increase the amount of detail we get during the interview, and also to temper the expectations to the child or adolescents' abilities. And we're going to speak of children that have particular issues with respect to this. And they also asked me to talk about the directives that were put forth through the Canadian Child Support Centers and Youth Advocacy Centers. It's important that we really deal with the research in terms of the ability of children to give an important amount of details, and particularly exact details. So I'm not going to enter into the details, but I just want to recall that the importance, it's really important to adapt the interview to the child's developmental level. A child 4 or 5 is not going to be the same as an adolescent that's 12 or 13 in terms of what they reveal during the interview. And secondly, it's to establish a rapport, a relationship of trust, to support a supportive environment, then to establish rules of communication in order to make natural, in order to have more chance for the child to be collaborative and to not be influenced by certain questions that we could be asking. It's important to get the child's account by way of recall memory rather than recognition memory, because what the research shows us that the information that comes from this free recall is a lot more exact and complete. Rather than getting all the details. But thanks to this free recall memory does allow greater details rather than just the recognition memory. So we have recommendations that have come from research is to practice with the child just with a few open-ended questions so that the child can better understand the task that the child's going to carry out, and why it is we're asking questions during the meeting with the child in order to, for the purposes of our allegations. We also have to really ask in as much as possible open questions at the beginning, and then towards the end, more specific questions. We also need to remain objective and explore alternative scenarios so that the child can explain, uh, uh, and this will allow us to better understand what's going on. And this interview needs to be filmed. It has to be in a private place. There can't be any distractions in order to provide the information to other people that are in the file, the prosecutor, the police, if the interview was not carried out by a police officer. And what it also avoids the child having to re-say what they've experienced. And these should be carried out at child advocacy centers, and that's going to provide access to a multidisciplinary team in terms to facilitate decision making after this forensic interview. So we can't neglect the part about the preparation of the interviewer. So we need to have some information before the interview about the child, their biographical information, any behavioral problems, developmental delays, and also their living environment. Are they living with both parents? What is the family makeup? Brothers, sisters, half siblings at the home? Is there any family violence in the home? And really understand those different elements. We also want to decide if there's going to, or figure out if there's going to be any issues, for example, with respect to the child's sexuality. What is important to be able to know? What are the activities, for example, that the child likes to, just to carry out some practice activities as kind of like a warm up in order to identify, for example, some pleasant event related to activities that the child likes to do. And have more in order to get more information about disclosure. Children that will disclose child or aggression towards them, they usually are children that we want to make sure that there's not going to be resistance, that they're going to be able to reveal what's happened during the interview. And if it's a child that has resistance, we will be able to see in our preparation if there's going to be difficulties to obtaining the information. What's important here to retain, we have to be ready to hear something else from the part of the child. Unfortunately, when the children reveal, they're often questioned by many people before the forensic interview. And these people are not trained in how to do these non-suggestive interviews. So the children could be influenced about giving a certain type of response, or to respond in a suggestive manner. And these can be different than what can be alleged at the beginning. So it's important to have an idea of the alleged facts, but we have to be prudent so that we don't make suggestive questions. So, as I stated previously, children who are ready to uh, reveal, or rather, there are children who are reluctant to disclose information, and they often show these signs of resistance very early on. Well, sometimes they have difficulties in showing in i- 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 there's been several research on the type of resistance shown by these children, and these studies have shown these children are going to be resistant to reveal. They show it really early on, during, like, right from the beginning of this interview. That's why it's really important to detect when we see this and try and act right away to try and earn the child's trust, to reassure them about their fears when they reveal or disclose information. So when we can think that it might be preferable to do a second or third interview if we see this resistance. I know that goes against saying we do just one filmed interview with the child, but we want to see that they're sometimes beneficial for children that have certain fears. So we may have to see them a second or third time without touching upon the alleged incident per se. So if we look at these kinds of sources of resistance on a nonverbal level, there's all kinds of signs of resistance, like hiding, or the child closing up, the child not looking at the interviewer, breaking the contact, getting up, moving around, wanting to leave the room even. So all these different kinds of body, all this body language, turning away, being bent over. So these are also showings that the child is uncomfortable. So we have to take this into account also in terms of verbal forms of resistance. The child might remain silent, or they might not want, they state that they don't want to talk, or they refuse to elaborate, they digress, they talk about other things. If we're lucky in a certain way, children will explain their negative emotions. So they'll explain that they feel anxious, afraid, timid. And this fact that that they are confused, sometimes they don't even understand that they're victims of aggression. Or abuse, and also shame. Sometimes they can verbalize us, and this will allow us to be aware of the child's resistance. So, what do we do when we see this resistance from the child? So, first of all, try and understand the source of this resistance and be able to reflect upon this, verbal or inverbal. Like, for example, I see you don't want to talk. What's going on? I see you're silent. What's happening? And so it seems that you're uncomfortable speaking to me about it. Speak to me about that discomfort so we can understand better what's blocking. So once the child responds to that, we can answer with or we can continue with open-ended questions to find out what's blocking the child, and then after validate the child's experience, that we understand that they're afraid, that it's normal, that they feel intimidated. If the child says, well, I don't know you, then validate that. We can then reassure the child in a more direct manner. However, according to, depending on the type of resistance, if the child like, there's certain things that are hard to deal with, like if the child's afraid that the aggressor will go to prison. So we can make empathetic kinds of statements to try and facilitate the contact with the child. Like, I know it's difficult for you to speak about it or to express yourself. So just like I said, as I explained earlier, try and validate the experience, like try and legitimize their expression. Here we can speak about good things, we can speak about things that are not so good, and to generalize the child's difficulties. Like, there's other children, they also feel uncomfortable, but I'm here to help you. And so generalize the fact that the child is not the only one that experiences these difficulties. Try and support the child, like to, I'm here to, for example, you try and express a degree of confidence and optimism. You can do it. Try to coach them. Try and show the child. I think it's important to be able to tell the child that as well. Some children, they're afraid that they've done something wrong, and just to clarify what it is that is our role, and just to comfort the child and to offer help. So really see that if we can employ several strategies with the child, we can also choose to postpone the interview to another date. Maybe it wasn't a good moment. Maybe the child was not feeling well. Maybe to choose to do this at a different time. And just to make sure that everything is well established. And maybe choose, maybe the child is afraid of disclosing things to us. So beyond that, we really have to prepare the child. That's aside from dealing with the resistance, in order to obtain the most details that are possible. And this will really to understand what has happened. So the goal of this forensic interview is to get as many details as possible with as least amount of questions as possible. So in order to this, we really have to pose open-ended questions that require recall memory, because they're more informative and less suggestive. So for open questions, I'm going to use what my colleagues and we call these open-ended questions, invitations, rather than suggestive types of questions. And that will increase the amount of details that we get. And also, it'll become we can start with open and then become more specific. However, when we speak about this invitation targeting free recall, like for example, tell me everything about it. Tell me everything about the last time that something happened. If the child stated, for example, they entered into the bedroom. So tell me everything that happened when he unlocked the door, like if the child mentioned that, or regardless of what the child says. So we really want to be able to understand this. Of course, the problem is that we have to work as much as we can on invitations, but one of the difficulties that we see on the ground, that's not part of the natural repertoire of the workers. So a certain effort has to be made in order to learn these things and develop a repertoire that we're comfortable with to ask these kinds of questions rather than asking these kind of more open rather than using questions like that are more specific. So anything that can help the free recall uh, can help. So we really want to work with these kinds of invitations, not ones that are disguised. Like, tell me more about how he touched you. Tell me more about how it happened. So these ones are a little more disguised. We really want to make these preferable invitations because childs are suggestible and we don't want to put any pressure on the child with respect to the content. And we it's the child that's going to be able to choose the content. And the words, when we're using the child's words and the child's content, they're going to be better able to understand the questions. And th these questions, we know how the memory works. We know that the free recall is going to be a lot better because the quality of what's recorded is going to vary, is going to depend on the child's attention. Now, all these directives, like these are all the H questions in English. So we're going to assume like how, who, what, when, where. But what we've looked at is when we look at these directive questions, they can force or they can focus on different goals that create some difficulties, like what happened to you. So that's about the actions. How did he touch you? What did he do? And information's about the context, about when did it happen, where were you when it happened, the information that's a little more practical there. So the questions that also so in terms of questions, how do you feel about him? Or questions, so questions that are dealing with the causality. What made you feel afraid? So they don't all present the same degree of difficulty for the children. Children are better to explain actions rather than static elements or things that are with respect to causality as well. So with preschool age children, the questions of why and how are used frequently. So although they're used a lot, they produce very few answers. Only in 20% of the 20% of the cases. So children find why questions to be accusatory or critical, and therefore they try to justify what they did rather than describe them. So the question why, that's a question when parents ask children when they're not happy with them. And so this doesn't have a good effect when they're used in the interview. So only 11% will just answer about what's happening, 28 about actions, 52 about context, static elements, causes, or assessment. When did it happen? Where did it happen? Description of clothing. For example, if there's DNA that we want to gather. But we have to be conscientious that these elements can be more difficult for children in order to give exact details. So we can use directive questions, but they have to be tempered because children are very suggestible. So children are often will not say what it is that they're feeling. Like if the question is not appropriate for the child's developmental level, like they will answer when, how many times, where, they'll just say, I don't know. So we really have to remember that everything is in the memory, and maybe some elements that are aimed at something directive might not have been registered in terms of the child. That's the way it works with memory. So I'm now going to speak to the different questions, certain questions like did questions, and they can also be suggestive because they go to the information. They go straight to the information. These questions, we should try not to use them during the interviews. The protocols say to use it after a pause, for example, once something has been revealed. So now, how to prepare the child or adolescent to increase the amount of detail that they're going to give. So practice with some practice on some neutral subject, only including invitation type questions, and not last for more than 7 minutes, particularly with young children. And they should follow the structure that'll be used during the declarative part. So really get a narrative from the beginning to the end with segments of time in order to cover more. But then using these specific invitation questions. I just wanted to show you a short video. And this is a video that was done with a 4-year-old child. And I just want to show you about how that goes. And so it's just in order to see the difficulty for those who are transcribing. So just to give you an idea. So this is a 4-year-old child. The fact that she went to a gym with a daycare, and the child had gone on a bus to a daycare center. So you went to the gym on a bus. I want you to describe everything that happened from the beginning to the end. I was on the trampoline, and then what happened? In Inaudible. There was a pillow, a gymnastic type mat that was there. I what happened after that? I don't remember anymore. So here we can see that even though we're asking the child to start from the beginning to the end, and that's surprising because that's what's better in their memory. And after some 3 or 4 short responses, the child says that the child doesn't remember anymore, and that could be the attention capacity of the child looking for some 3 or 4 different elements here. So now I'm going to follow up. She's a little timid. She's a little uncomfortable. The interpreter apologizes. It's inaudible. Tell us what happened when you left the daycare and when you arrived at the gym. I walked. And then I had to go. Then I went into the bus. Okay. You went into the bus, inaudible. Inaudible. What happened after you were on the bus? You were telling me that you walked a long time to get to the bus. Tell me about this. So when I arrived, I was waiting on the sidewalk because the bus hadn't arrived yet. And then what happened? What happened is when we got, then the bus came and then we went to the back. So you were standing up. So what happens when you have to go inaudible? So you went to the gym and so I had to go. I had to run very quickly. And after you ran in quickly, in oh, inaudible. No, oh, I had. And then then I got on a cushion and we had to walk over to the cushions. And then after, we had to do like a cartwheel and this. And after what happened, then I jumped on the trampoline 5 times. And then I had to go to the daycare. So can you tell me about everything until when you went to the back to the daycare? So I did the same thing when I went to the gym, to gymnastics, inaudible. So when I arrived in the bus, we had to do the same thing. We had to get a seat, a place to sit down. Oh, so you got a seat on the bus. Okay. How long were you on the bus? I don't know. You don't know. Okay. So there were several things to talk about this extract. We see that children have difficulties in answering certain questions when they're doing questions. So, for example, if they don't understand the question, we can see at the beginning it was about I don't remember anymore. And then after, once we got into the story, when the child didn't remember, the child was able to give us details. So we can see it was more the attention capacity that was involved rather than just the cognitive and memory that was involved in order to describe the story. So when the child was unable to respond, the child moved all over the place. It was the same degree of discomfort. So I just want to show you what could have followed after that. Like if I asked a child to speak to us about another situation in which her body, the child's body was touched, because that could be similar questions. So what I want to show you here is how the child is going to respond to the first part. Just one moment. I'm going to look for the biddy and what could the beginning be? The declarative part. This is on another subject. Inaudible. I want you to tell me what happened right from the beginning to the end. It was necessary. So dad had to put on the cream. And then after he put on some bandages, and then it was necessary to take the bandages off. Oh, and then there's like he touched me with a type of like crayon, and then he had to put the bandages on. So we see how the child had learned from the first part and was all ready to tell me a story that was a lot more detailed. I had some 12 different elements, one after the other, after the child was able to formulate all this. Oh, in order to state these. So we see that the training, when the training is done for the interviewer, that allows us to be able to assess the child's developmental level. Can they explain themselves? For instance, at the age of 4 years, like that child could express themselves well. So is it difficult for the child to explain what the child did? But It would allow us to really adjust to the child's ability to provide certain types of information, as well as the child's pace, style, and show an interest kind of to consolidate the alliance and establish a baseline, which the declarative part can be compared to in case where there's a doubt whether the abuse really happened. So I think that in this short extract, that allowed us to really have showed us to use these open-ended questions, and that allows the child to understand the amount of detail expected, so the child can give us a lot more of information, and understand also that the investigator or interviewer doesn't know anything about the child. Also to learn to trust the interviewer, as well as develop a sense of competence in answering questions, because they're easy questions for the child to answer, so the child feels competent. And we see the progression as the video goes forward. The more the child speaks, the child feels a certain degree of confidence. So all the research has showed us that these trained children, they cooperate more, they're less resistant. And so if we see that there's resistance there, we right away have to deal with it and explore it to try and find a solution with the child. And those children that are trained with invitations and not direct questions, they're going to give a more complete narrative, and they're going to be followed up with answers that are 3 or 4 times more detailed and lengthy. So based on this, I want to talk to you how we need to really temper our expectations in terms of the abilities of the child and adolescent. So children continue to develop up to the age of 21 to 25. And that means that adolescents do not operate in the same way as adults do. Adolescents, yes, they have more cognitive abilities, but in terms of their comfort, they often they can rather adolescents, they can understand better than younger children. They're cognitively trained, they've undergone different tests, and particularly with sexual things that sometimes when it comes to sexual behaviors, it's more difficult for adults rather than children after they have revealed. We did have allegations from other people that mean that the in which adolescents are interviewed. Adolescents are going to learn, or going to be accompanied often by their parents, and we can't be surprised that young children are a lot more competent. They're not as, and to explain, to tell us um, in in a different way rather than adolescents than adults in terms of the time and place. And the other thing that's important to recall when we're doing these forensic interviews, so abused children have a delay in terms of their language acquisition on average. Like an 8-year-old child might respond like a 6.5-year-old child, and they might not understand everything. They might not have vocabulary to answer, and not everything is registered in the memory. And so even if the children, they're older, they might not be capable of responding. So we have to have realistic expectations in terms of the child, and being able to judge in a more, not easily, but be- better judge what the child is saying in terms of what they're describing. Now, with the young children, we see that there are usually short accounts, and they're really focused on gestures because that's part of what they're competent, where rather they have a low capacity for specifying the location, the time, name. From 6 to 8, they use possessive and qualitative adjectives to better describe what happened to them. And they can describe what happened better in terms of the gestures rather than describing the place, the moment, and other aspects of the interview. So they're more, from 6 to 8, they can situate the moment in relation to their everyday activities, the day that they do particular activities. Now, starting at 9 years, children use more accurate and varied words to describe their gestures. Like, for instance, for if they're describing like a slapping, hitting, or they'll use more qualitative adjectives, and they'll give more time indicators in a spontaneous matter, like how long it lasted, how in terms of frequency. They can also name their emotions and their thoughts more than the younger children. Now, children who have an intellectual disability or autism, ADD. So the research says that we can expect a performance that's similar to their performance will be similar to children of the same mental or chronological age. And if the disability is moderate, then there'll be less information about the chronology, context, and content rather, and context markers. They'll answer with shorter answers, answer 2 out of 3 questions. So they're going to need more questions to cover all the elements. And these questions should be invitations with cues. And that will allow them to give more information. And autist children, they're more concrete. The sentences should be short. And these children have a tendency to answer yes more frequently than they should. So using did type questions will not work. So now I want to talk about the learning and how to keep the maintenance of skills, which is part of the recommendations that are made in the directives, or rather the guidelines. So this is a protocol that's evidence-based. There's several of them, but I'm going to recommend this, the NICHD. I've been working with this protocol for the past 20 years. It's the most validated one, empirically speaking. So we know that it really is able to help us. So the it really is important training and requires a formal exam. Now, it's the key to success of this. They should be, all the research shows us that regardless of how long the training lasts, the protocol that can be used, there's always a loss of certain doing. So like there has to be reflective practice in order to keep the skills, in order we can manage our mistakes, how to ask questions, and we really need to be able to work with one's colleagues, for instance, working in a group or with colleagues. And sometimes in this type of situation, given the stress, one has to know that they've done the best, that you've done the best that you can in order to get the best disclosure. But we do role playing with children on neutral subjects. That could be a good way of expanding one's repertoire. And it's because it's not part of our natural way of parents or interviewers. That's not how we usually speak to our children. So if you're interested in this, I just want to highlight that there's a piece of work in French and in English that looks at this suggestive aspects in terms of disclosure with children, and the protocol is detailed with an interviewer who has explications on how to prepare the interview. We also, there's a book by Michael by these three authors. And this was done at the Palo Alto University, and it's a workshop on using the revised NICHD protocol. So that's my brief presentation in terms of how to conduct efficient forensic interviews. Now, I'm wondering if you have any questions. I don't know if you want to write these questions in the chat box or say them verbally, and the questions could therefore be translated. If you have any questions, or rather any comments.
Alors, s'il n'y a pas de questions, j'espère que ça veut dire que
There's no questions. I hope that it was clear and useful for you. You can reach me by email. My information was, my details are at the end of the information. So I'm just going to check here. So with respect to the language delay, what the research shows is that the delay is around 1.5 years. So when we speak of children who are mistreated or abused, we've done studies with children who were seen within the forensic interview. And what we've noticed, what the research shows, is that the children have a delay of 1.5 years. So how long will that last? It could last as long as it takes for the child to recover in terms of school, in order to recover their vocabulary. We know that there's adults that we've met as well that are limited in terms of their abilities to be able to express or describe what they've experienced. So I don't have a response or an answer that is based on the empirical research about how long it lasts, but I think that it could last quite a while if the child could maybe catch, if the child is stimulated, the child could be stimulated at school. Yes, children do learn at home. So if we're in a family where very few questions are asked, how did it go to school? How did you like the film? How did you like this activity? But if we don't allow children to tell us stuff, that also explains why children in the environment, in a more negligent environment, are going to be more limited to report about what they have experienced.
D'autres questions? OK. OK.
So
Est-ce que le fait d'engager l'enfant dans
to
une
engage the
activité
child in an activity such as coloring, if it's a neutral activity, so we don't say, oh, draw something in particular, we can think that for certain children, maybe coloring could help. At the same time, if it's difficult to engage the child at that level, maybe we have to look and see what is causing a problem with the child. Is it difficult to get their answers? How they begin the interview. That's why we're going to start off with easy questions. So if we take the NICHD protocol, we learn if we say hello, how's it going now, speak to you about things that you like to doing, it's unusual that the child wouldn't want to answer those activities. So we want to engage the child in a dialogue as quickly as possible. But if for certain children, it might help to be able to handle the stress, it could help, but drawing, if it's just a neutral activity, I think it could be doable. Do we have any other questions? Thank you so much for attending and for your help. And I wish you a good afternoon. Bye-bye.